Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lauren Bell. I am the Vice President of the Learning Disability Association of Georgia, and we are excited to be here with Caroline Sumners, and who is presenting about executive functioning and some strategies that can be applied to students, families. So we're really excited to have everyone here today. Caroline has a lot to share, and there's the chat box is available if you have any questions that come up. She'll also leave time for a Q&A at the end. But I'll pass it over to you, Caroline, and let you introduce yourself before you dive into your presentation.
Thanks so much, Lauren. I'm really happy to be here and share more about executive functioning skills. I'm a former teacher, so I love to really tailor what I'm teaching to my audience. And so, thank you so much for those of you who've shared in the chat already the age of the child that you're hoping to support and why you're here, what you're hoping to learn. I see we've got college age. You're hoping to help your daughter figure out some ways to help her. I see we've got a 13-year-old son who's very scattered, someone who tutors several students. I love that. Love to see how you can incorporate some of this into your profession. So if you haven't yet had a chance to share, I would love to hear so that I can tailor my examples to your age. The great thing about the strategies I'm going to talk about today are they can be scaled up or down and modified for different age groups. But once I know who's here, I can help target them even more. Um, so yes, please, as Lauren mentioned, use the chat throughout. I'm happy to address questions in the moment. You don't have to hold them all for the Q&A at the end. So I am the founder of a company called Empower Academic Coaching. I started this company because when I was teaching middle school and high school, I saw that in school there is so much focus on what to learn and not enough time and emphasis put on how to learn. And that's a huge part of the equation. There are so many skills that I think even teachers are not adequately prepared to teach students about because we think they're too simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Uh, these executive functioning skills, some students pick them up well enough by observation, but others need really concrete, tangible experiences with these EF skills. And so I'm going to go over some strategies today that will help you to be able to do that direct teaching with your child. And we're a group of neurodivergent educators. We specialize in working with students who have ADHD, who have learning disabilities, autism, or who are just, for whatever reason, school is causing some struggles. And we really like to empower our students to have more joyful learning experiences. We do that by teaching them the academic and executive functioning skills they need to succeed. And we do that privately and through collaborating with schools. All right, so it's good to start with an understanding of what executive functioning is. There's lots of different ways to explain it. You can think of it as your brain management system or the CEO of your brain, the one who's calling the shots, making the decisions, incorporating information to set goals for the future and be strategic in achieving them. I've also seen it compared to an air traffic control system where you have lots of different things going on and you need someone who can safely see through the noise and make sure that everybody gets where they need to go. Or an orchestra conductor who is needing to bring together all these disparate sounds and make it into one beautiful, cohesive piece, who's able to react quickly to what's happening. So essentially, you can think of this as skills that allow us to set and achieve goals and solve problems. And there's three very basic ones that set the foundation for what a host of skills that we tend to think more of when we think of executive functioning. So one is inhibition. This is the ability to just filter out some things that are not appropriate for the task at hand. So, when someone says something that is really distracting, if someone were to come in right now into my office and start talking to me, I would have to use my inhibition to remain focused on the task at hand, which is sharing executive functioning strategies with all of you. Working memory is when you can hold pieces of information in your mind and be able to work with them. So, for example, right now, I'm having to use my working memory, remembering what you all have shared in the chat, that there's someone here who wants to support their college age daughter, their 13-year-old son, and a tutor who's working with students who are 5th through 11th grade. I'm having to hold that in my mind while also giving this presentation. And you can imagine children at school are having to use working memory all the time, both at school and at home. And then there's flexibility, and this is specifically cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch and adapt to a new situation. So, for example, if a student goes into school thinking there's going to be one thing available for lunch and it ends up being something different, the ability to roll with the punches, so to speak, and figure out that they're going to be okay with a different option. Or if they expected their teacher to be at tutoring that day and the teacher had to leave early, having to adapt and think, well, what's another way that I'm going to prepare for my test? These skills take a long time to develop, until at least 25 years to fully develop. And even after that, there's still the ability to continue refining these skills. So, helping our children with this requires a healthy dose of patience and understanding that we're in it for the long haul. These take a lot of time and a lot of practice. So, those are the three basic ones, but they build a foundation for other skills that are probably what you think of when you hear executive functioning. Things like focus, task initiation, emotional regulation, self monitoring, basically being able to figure out how well am I doing towards a goal that I set for myself, what might I need to adjust, things like planning and organizing as well. So I want you to take a look at the list, and I'd love for you to share in the chat which of these you feel are strengths for yourself and which are more challenging for you. Yeah, so I see a strength in emotional regulation. That's definitely one of mine as well. Uh, as a teacher, that came in handy to just really be able to stay calm in the face of a lot of different things going on. I can see that focus can be a challenge sometimes. I definitely can empathize with that. Yeah, so among us, we have different strengths and different challenges. And part of what I wanted to accomplish by pausing and asking this question is for you to see that there are some things that we have gotten really good at, or maybe have a natural disposition toward. And then there's some things that have continued to be a challenge for us, even as adults, even as people who have had that over 25 years of development. And so that's going to guide a lot of the strategies that I share. Is some of them are about making that skill better, and some of them are about finding workarounds, so that even though something might be a challenge, that doesn't mean that you can't be successful in life utilizing that skill. Okay, so how does this specifically impact students with learning disabilities? So I want you to take a look at this list and think about what skills students would need to use while they're reading a book. So for working memory, that might need to be holding in mind what has happened earlier in the chapter so that they can understand what's happening later. Task initiation, to even start reading at all, would include that. Something upsetting might have just happened, or something really exciting, but they know they need to complete the reading. And so they've got to use emotional regulation to be able to set that to the side for a moment and focus on the task at hand. Of course, they'll need to use focus. If they come across a word that has multiple meanings, they'll need to use flexible thinking. Same thing with learning a new math concept. They will need to hold different pieces in their working memory about how to solve this problem. They'll need to use planning in order to be able to follow the steps. They'll need to use focus to be able to understand what their teacher is talking about. And so I share all this to say that um, if you also are having difficulty with the actual decoding of reading or the fluency of reading, or you're struggling with dyscalculia, um, that having these other components be part of it can really increase the cognitive load on a student who is working on their reading or math. And so it's important for us to know there is a higher incidence of challenges with executive function skills in students with disabilities. There's that higher level of brain demand that's happening, and they need some opportunities for more strategic practice, because just observing what other people do is probably not going to be enough. They need some opportunities to really practice it and learn it as a toolkit of strategies. And then there's also that shame component of maybe noticing that for other people it may appear to come more easily. Why can't I do what everyone else is doing? I wanted to put this one here because one of the number one things that I hear from parents when I talk to them about getting some support from their child is, do you do this for adults? Um, it's, a lot of adults feel that these things are struggles too. And I don't think there's enough conversation about how difficult these things can be. Have hope. There are definitely strategies to work towards them, and all of us can improve there. But I like to share that because I think sometimes students make the assumption that other people are not struggling with this. And by teaching these as actual strategies, it helps to remove that thinking that this is something you're supposed to just be born knowing how to do. So, what can we do to help? Like I mentioned, there's things we can do to make this skill set stronger, but also develop a workaround for the challenges. So, Lynn Meltzer is someone who's done a lot of work in this area, and she talks about a cycle of success. Basically, once students begin to develop strategies for a particular challenge they're having in executive functioning, they start to have some success, even if it's small success. That success builds confidence. That confidence leads them to put more effort in next time. And that effort means that they're going to choose from their bank of strategies and continue that cycle of success. If students don't think they have strategies to pull from, if they think that the key to focusing is to just try harder, then that's going to lead to some inconsistent success, which can cause low confidence and then make them think, well, is it even worth putting effort in? So let's talk about how we can get them on that cycle of success where they can pull from their strategies. So, one thing that I like to do in teaching strategies is it allows kids to pull from their strengths. So I have a snowboard picture here because has anyone else been watching some of the Winter Olympics? I have been watching, I love watching the snowboarding, and there is a snowboarder named Scotty James who is super tall, like 6'3", 6'4", and that's very unusual for snowboarders. They're usually, their height definitely starts with a 5. Um, and that has a lot of strengths. Shorter snowboarders are able to, because of their center of gravity, it's just easier for them to do these wild looking flips. Um, but he has learned how to work with his strength. He's not going to be able to have as much control over himself as he's rotating through the air as a shorter snowboarder would. But his height means that he can get much greater height. And it means that when he comes down, he has a lot more stability on his board because there's more weight on the board. So I share this example to say that a lot of times, if kids are struggling with something, they can begin to feel a little bit hopeless, like, well, this, I can't be organized. I never feel like I'll be organized. I'm just not an organized person. When I'm working with a student like that, I like to look for other opportunities where they have shown a great skill and then use that for the future. I actually use that today with one of my students. She is struggling in her biology class and she's a lacrosse student. And so we talked about, okay, last time you were struggling with something in lacrosse, what did you do? And she actually came up with a great plan. She identified a skill that was holding her back in her matches. She talked with her coach about it. She found a friend on the team who would practice with each and every practice, and then she put that into practice consistently. So I asked her, that actually sounds like really organized. How would you apply that to this biology situation? And so it flipped the script from her thinking this is something I can't do to this is something I've done before. Let me use it in a new context. I also like talking about strategies because it shows that it's possible to grow and develop in really specific ways. Um, Again, I'll go back to the snowboarder. He has a documentary on Netflix right now that I watched recently called Pipe Dream. And it's all about how he was at the top of his field and then he just started losing. He was just losing competition after competition to the point where he wasn't sure he wanted to continue anymore. Um, he said, maybe I'm just not naturally good at this. But instead of giving up, he started working on a really specific workout routine to strengthen his muscles, to build his conditioning. And the way that I see that related to EF skills is students don't talk about these things usually with each other. They don't talk about the way that they're organizing, the way that they're studying, maybe a little bit, but in general, every student that I work with and talk with is convinced they're the only one who's getting help. So, talking openly about how other people are strategic, like this snowboarder was not just, he wasn't just born great at snowboarding. He also had to work really hard at it and come up with a specific plan that he followed. As much as you can share your own strategies that you use, that helps to demystify this and lets them know that everyone is actually using strategies to help themselves improve. And also, these strategies provide opportunities to practice effectively and reduce that shame that they may feel about not being at the top of the organizing, planning, and prioritizing game yet. Before we dive into what does help build EF skills, I want to talk a little bit about what doesn't. So, one would be doing things for them. And I chose this picture of fishing because, there's that old story that you can give a man a fish or you can teach him how to fish. And I would say teaching them obviously is going to help them to be more successful here. But also, there's the flip side of that. Consequences only don't build these skills either. So if someone doesn't get a fish that day and they're rewarded with just not having a meal, the consequences, well, you didn't catch a fish, no fish for you. That doesn't lead to learning. They don't know how to fish better next time. So consequences don't equal learning. They can be an important part of learning, but something I see a lot in schools is um, this tension between wanting to help students, but also wanting them to have natural consequences. And so, a place that I see this a lot is with penalties for late work. So, some schools have taken away the penalty for late work, saying, and that's essentially like doing something for the student, saying it's okay to just turn your work in whenever. Um, and I know that that is part of some students' plans and an accommodation. And I'm not speaking about that component right now. There are some schools who just do not have penalties for late work. Then there are others that do have penalties, but the penalty itself is not going to make a student turn in work on time. Instead, that's a skill that actually needs to be taught. It seems too simple to teach, but like I said earlier, simple doesn't mean easy. So there's a way to strike that balance in the middle, and that is using something called high standards and high support, which I read a lot about in this book. For anyone who works, parents, um, or somehow supports young people in their life, I cannot recommend this book more highly. It's called 10 to 25 because it's about that age range. As a teacher, I was perplexed that there would be a book that could be about such a wide age range, but it makes a lot of sense once you see it. There's actually a lot of commonalities in how their brain is functioning at that time. And what the author talks about is that when we have low standards for students but high support, that can be kind of enabling behavior. So that's where we're like doing things that actually they should be doing for themselves. But if we have high standards and low support, that's where they're just facing consequences and not actually getting the learning that they need. So it's really important to have both. We can keep our high standards, but they need high support to get there. So that high support is often called scaffolding. So any teachers in the group, this will definitely be familiar to you. Um, if you're not familiar with the concept, it's basically just like in building a building, we need to have scaffolding outside it to provide support. You can provide that support for your own child and then remove the pieces as they build their own building of the skill. All right, so let's get into the strategies. I have several that I want to share with you. Please don't go out and try all of them at once. I would love for you to pick one to start with and generate some successes with it. There's going to be some that I'll share where you will think, yes, my child will absolutely not engage in this type of activity with me. That's okay. That it might be better for you down the line, but there will be, I hope, at least a few that I share where you think, yeah, I can see having this conversation with my child. I can see them being open to this. And that's the one that I would love for you to start off with. So, one strategy that can help promote planning and prioritizing and goal setting, in addition to a host of other EF skills, uh, is to have a dedicated time each week where you all meet as a family and review and create your family calendar. So, this is where you can talk about everything that you all have upcoming at school, at work. Which days do we have practice? What will I need for practice? Set and make progress toward goals. So, for students who are getting ready to take their driver's test, that might be talking about when they're going to get their hours, when they're studying for their test, when they're actually going to schedule their test, who they need to help them by driving them there. And it's also a good time to talk about due dates, DUE, versus DO dates. So, this is an example of that. A lot of students will, if they do get on the organizing and planning train, they will write down things like when their biology test is or when an essay is due. But something that is not often explicitly taught in schools is when to actually do the thing. When are you going to do the studying? When are you going to get the materials for your project? When are you going to ask your parents if they can go to the store and pick up what you need for your project? When are you going to make the list of things that you need for them? And so, talking about that difference can be part of your family meeting. This is also a great chance to make the calendar visible and to put some things in the hands of your child. Things like you can have them start to gain more responsibility in writing and keeping up with their own activities. Um, I'm a big fan of starting with things that they think are fun. So if that's putting on the calendar when they're spending time with their friends, if they're, planning a get together with friends and they want to have some snacks, even things like asking them, okay, what do you want for the snacks? What are the ingredients that you need? When do we need to go to the store? How much do you think it's going to cost? Those kinds of questions will really get them laying the foundation for these important EF skills. So some other ideas is thinking about using sports or music. Anytime you're starting this new type of skill, starting with something that they enjoy first will inherently be more motivating than talking about their math test coming up. Eventually, yes, talk about that, but start with something that they will enjoy and can see immediate value in. Another opportunity that a lot of families I've worked with have used is some low stakes practice. So, part of the reason that we want to step in and help kids and sometimes have that high support but low standards is when we don't want them to fail and then have negative consequences from failing. So, and that makes sense in a lot of circumstances. For example, if a student is about to fail a class and that's going to have long term effects on their future, that is not the time to let them just practice their EF skills without coming in and helping them like really develop a concrete plan. But there are some things that are much lower stakes that they can go ahead and take over with your support. Um, so right here I have a picture of my three dogs because I've got to use a lot of executive functioning to be able to make sure that they get all the things that they need. Yes, they do each have their own bed, but they insist on all being on the same one. And so, your child can help start thinking about, you know, things like making a pet care schedule, figuring out how they're all going to get to the vet at the right time. They can help you plan the next family vacation or your next Saturday outing, kind of thinking through what are the things we need, what's the schedule we're going to use. One of my favorites is haircuts. I had a parent that I worked with who her high school senior was totally in charge of scheduling his own haircuts. And, we talked earlier about how consequences aren't the same as learning, but they can be part of it. The consequence is if he didn't make it to his appointment on time, he would have to pay from his own money, whatever the cancellation fee was. Obviously, that I think that would be a little too intense for a younger child, but this shows you how you can kind of uh, upgrade them to new levels. And they went over, here's how to make your appointment. How are you going to make sure you keep track of it? And we're talking about these things. How does pet care and haircuts and vacation, how does that really add up to helping them do better with these lifelong skills and do better in school? It's because of there's a saying that what fires together wires together. So basically, the same thinking networks they're having to use to plan and organize and be flexible in their thinking. If an appointment isn't available on the day they wanted, how they're going to adjust their schedule to pick it out on another day. Those are things that can be applied then as they build confidence in those skills to school. So here you can support them by just asking lots of questions rather than giving answers. Um, and this won't transfer really far. So I'm not saying that because they can come up with a whole pet care schedule that they will then like automatically be able to come up with a study schedule for school. But what you are doing is giving them some successful experiences to draw from. So earlier I was talking about my student who had that experience in lacrosse. Because she told me about that, I was then able to use that and help her apply it to the study schedule that she needed to develop. And so, as you witness your child going through these things, planning out your family Saturday outing, then you can say, hey, remember when you did that? I've seen that you're really great at organizing. You thought through how we were going to manage our time that day. How could you use what you did that day to help you prepare for this math test? And that emphasizes the importance of asking those questions because it would be easy for us to say as the adult in the situation, we know exactly what it would take for them to do well on the math test. We know they need to study this day. We know they need to get their study guide. We know they need to go see their teacher. Um, but you also know that, especially if the student in question is an adolescent, that's not going to be received well. It's not going to make your relationship any better, and it's not going to make them more likely to do it. Adolescents, especially, are more likely to do something if they're the ones who came up with the idea. So when you ask the questions, it's really important to make it seem like there's not one right answer, but there's actually multiple right answers, which further feeds into the cycle of flexible thinking. They're thinking of multiple ways to get to an end result. Another strategy uh, that can be really helpful is to think out loud. So, this is where all the thoughts you have in your brain um, as you're going through a task, you actually verbalize them. Because as we were talking about earlier, if students aren't exposed to something, they can make assumptions. So uh, they may just think that the elegant way that you are able to come home from work and get everyone dinner and also make a little time for yourself, hopefully, in the midst of all that, they may just think that's just naturally happening. But if you talk a little bit out loud about your thinking, then they can see, oh, this is actually the kind of process that people go through when they're trying to navigate multiple demands. So, for example, this might be, hey, so I just got home from work. I know I want to go for a run, but I also need to get dinner on the table by 6. I kind of forgot what we have for dinner. So I'm going to check the fridge right now, see what we have. And then I think I'm going to go for my run after that. And then when I get back, I'm going to chop the vegetables and put the chicken in the oven. That's something that you can adjust based on your child, their exact age. Um, but the key part is to really model like the kinds of questions you're asking yourself, the kinds of detours you're making, like if you're opening the fridge and you don't see what you expect, what are the things that you're saying to yourself to help you still reach your ultimate goal, which is to get dinner on the table. um, I would say, especially for adolescents, this is going to take patience and consistency, uh, but it will really pay off over time for them to see the thinking process. Another way that you can do this is if they're asking for your help with homework, to not just explain the actual steps of the problem, but explain your thinking. So for me, when I do this with my students, I'll look at the sheet that they're showing me. Maybe it's different math problems, and I'll say, okay, so first I want to see what kind of math problem this is. Okay, this is a systems of equations problem. Now I'm thinking about, what do I know about systems of equations? Well, I know that it includes, uh, two or more equations um, that have they can have solutions with each other. I kind of remember I can use substitution maybe as a way to solve them, maybe elimination. Yes, definitely that's coming back to me. I remember those two ways. Oh, I just also remembered you can use graphing. Okay. And that's showing that you're kind of building up what's the context before diving into the problem. And that's modeling for them that, hey, before I just dive into a math problem, let me think about what I already know. Related to that is asking some what if questions. And this really helps with promoting flexible thinking and self monitoring and inhibition. So, this is having your child articulate and think through those options. So, for example, they've got soccer practice and math tutoring at the same time on the same day. What are their options? So, it would be easy to just say, like, no, you're going to math tutoring. That's more important than soccer. And sometimes that may be the case. So as I'm going through all these, I just want to make it clear that the expectation is not that every single time uh, that you have an opportunity to use this, that that's what you're doing. There are some times where you have to make a decision. There may not be time to have this conversation. There are lots of reasons why it may not be the right time and place. But for those moments when you do, when you sense that this is a great time to help them build these skills, take the time to do it and know that it will just be these small moments that add up for each other. So in this case, you may ask them, okay, what are your options? And they can think through, well, maybe I could ask my teacher if I can go to tutoring at a different time. Then they're also building that skill of self advocacy to go to their teacher and see if there's another time it can be offered in a way that they can meet both of their goals. It can also involve some perspective taking. So, thinking about how's this going to impact my teammates? How's this going to impact my future self when I'm taking the math test? But most importantly, is helping them see there's more than one way to solve the problem and that they don't have to get stymied by obstacles. Instead, they can think their way around them. And then another strategy that I love is using visuals. So, this is great, especially if you have a child who struggles with organization or with task initiation, getting ready in the morning. Having those conversations can sometimes amp up the frustration in an already frustrating situation. So, telling them what to grab for their backpack in a rushed morning is not going to be great for anyone. So, what a lot of families have found success with is creating a visual representation of what they're hoping for, and creating that with the child's input, and then putting that up. So that visual representation could literally be this picture of the book bag. This book bag shows, what a ready book bag would be. It's got the calculator, it's got the notebooks, the pens, the water bottle. So um, take a picture and then you can put that on the front door. Like, this is what it looks like to be ready for school the next morning. Or it could be a checklist that has all of the things that they need. Um, an important part here is to really create it with them so that it feels like something they're participating in and have some agency over rather than it's just another list they have to follow or something they have to do. Instead, it's actually teaching them a strategy that they can use for other things as well. And I also wanted to mention this here because sometimes parents, I think, struggle with knowing how much time should they be dedicating to their schoolwork versus other things. A lot of the other things that are part of your child's life can be really helpful in building executive functioning skills. So, exercise is great. Um, music, practicing music is great for this, especially exercise that includes character development like martial arts, or if it includes mindfulness like yoga, and anything that includes some attention, balance, and coordination can really help. And so that's something to keep in mind as schools, unfortunately, are limiting these things more and more, are limiting exposure to exercise, to music, to art. uh, Keep that in mind that including those things in your child's schedule are absolutely helping them to be more successful in school and EF as well. And then here's a little bonus one I wanted to throw in, which is the importance of reflecting and celebrating their successes. School is so fast paced. As soon as a student gets their test grade back, they have to move on to the next concept. So there's little time to really think about what worked for me this time or what didn't work for me this time, and then making adjustments for the future. And especially for students who have challenges in school, there's not always time to pause and really focus on some of those smaller wins that build up to the big wins. It might just be focused on grades or focused on how many missing assignments there are, rather than, hey, you had fewer missing assignments this week. What helped you get there so that we can repeat that next week and keep building on that success? So, earlier I asked you all about strengths and challenges, and you can use that to your own experiences with that to help your child think through what they are, how they're using their strengths to help them in their areas of challenge and to help them to focus on the small things that they're doing well. And then, of course, there, especially as you get to the teenage years, there may be some students who think they don't need help or they may not be extremely receptive to parental help. And so, for that, I would say that book that I recommended earlier is a great resource. But also, all the things I mentioned are things that parents can do, but there are things that other people in your child's village can do as well. And this is a great time to maybe call in some aunts, uncles, neighbors, grandparents. It does not have to be all you. Um, there's a lot of research to support actually that adolescents having like really rich connections to other adults who can help them and who care about them and support them is really protective for their mental health, but it can also help them to continue to build these EF strategies. So if there's anyone that you want to send this to or share some of what you learned and ask if they can be part of your team on helping with this. I definitely have a few neighbors that I help them with these executive functioning skills. That's an option as well. I would say patience is really important with adolescents here too. And also just speaking to them in a way that makes them feel respected and like they truly are older. It can be embarrassing for them if they're struggling with things that they don't perceive their peers are struggling with. You can tell them their peers are struggling with it, but like we've talked about, they're not openly discussing how difficult it is to organize or how difficult it is to balance the demands of your sports and your school schedule. And so um, really treating them with that respect and solving problems alongside them using the strategies we've talked about. I'm not saying they will take to it immediately, but over time, as you continue to engage in those conversations with them, I think you will notice a difference because it's about planting seeds. EF skills, because they're so long lasting, are not just something that or you can teach in a week. It's going to take a lot of time. And so I just like to remind myself of this when I'm working with a student where it's just taking a while. Um, there's going to be a lot of planting and it may be a while before you see the results, but it really does make a difference. And when you see that first result, that first sprout of them organizing well or planning and prioritizing, be sure to point that out to them. So I'd love to know, feel free to unmute or share in the chat something that you are taking away from what we've talked about today.
I want to buy that book. Can you share the name of that book again?
Absolutely. It's called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People.
I'm going to write that in the chat in case anybody else wants to look it up.
Yeah, so in the chat, it's nice to hear that high expectations and high support, all I ever hear is let them fail. Yes, that breaks my heart because I think it comes from a well-intentioned place, thinking that if they face some natural consequences, that will help them. And consequences are part of it, but they're not the whole thing. Um, consequences are so different from learning, and so I always like to think about before we get to the consequence, have I helped them? Have I laid out a path for them where they can avoid that consequence, where they can learn how to um, succeed in that area? I'm glad it was a great reminder that as adults we experience some of the same challenges. I think that's so great to verbalize to them too. It felt good to know that some of our gut instincts about how to work with our son have been in line with your suggestions. I'm so glad. Yes, trust those parental instincts. Um, See if she can think of the positives and what she did that was good and use that for the harder things. Yes. Um, as you all know, like it can be so demotivating to feel like we're failing all the time. When I think of what my students are going through, I think of if I had seven different bosses who all had different things that they wanted from me and weren't talking to each other to make sure that the deadlines weren't all lining up. And I only had an hour with each one each day and then just had to rotate and keep track of all of those things. That's extremely taxing on a student, and then on top of that to feel like they're not doing well can be so demotivating. So we can be that positive force for them. um, we can have those high standards for them but also bring in a lot of support and encouragement. I'm so glad to hear those amazing takeaways, and now I'd love to open it up for some questions.
Well, if there are no other questions, I would like to ask you a question that I get asked a lot is how to support with homework. And I know that you had said that you had some strategies for that.
Yeah, so what could you give me an example with homework?
Maybe like I know you kind of touched on this with like the to do versus or due date versus due date,
Mhm.
but like a science project, like coming home with like a really, really big project that feels very overwhelming. Do you have like a method that you like to kind of tackle a big project?
Yeah, definitely. So a big project is a great place to work on a bunch of executive functioning skills. So when a student comes to me with that, the first thing I like to do is start with a lot of questions. So that could be, um, what is your understanding of what you have to do in this project? And then I ask, could you share with me what your teacher shared with you so that then I can read and see, do I agree with their interpretation? Were they missing something? Did we interpret something differently? And then I like to ask them, what would a finished project look like? What sorts of things will you need to finish the project? What questions do you still have about the project that you need to ask your teacher? What will it take for you to be able to finish this project on time?
Mhm.
What would that look like? So again, I would lean into some of that visual element and say, what's it going to look like after school each day this week? With your project being due on Friday, what's it going to look like here at the kitchen table Tuesday? What's it going to look like on Wednesday? So
Yeah.
that then they can actually visualize themselves sitting down, and they might say something like, oh, well, on Tuesday, that means I'm going to be sitting and doing my research. I'm going to be on my computer. I'm going to need some research questions or topics to look up. And then I might ask, okay, and what do you want to have by the end of Tuesday? um, for Wednesday, okay, I'm going to be actually like making my poster. So I'm going to need my supplies. Oh, then I actually need to back up. I'm not going to have my supplies on Wednesday at this point. I need to ask my parents to help me get stuff on Tuesday night. And so they can make those adjustments and really think through the plan like that.
That's really helpful. I like that it's so self-guiding and like you said, you're not giving them the answers and helping. That's super. Caroline, do you have an email address at the end of this slide, or can you put it in the chat so that if anybody maybe is interested in, oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I'll put my email in the chat and then um, that is a link that you can use to get on our newsletter if you'd like to.
Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, because I know that people probably have follow-up questions, and I know that you do provide services to, you know, obviously this is your area of specialty. So if people have any other questions, they can reach out to you. And this is recorded, so we'll send this to everybody that registered. And you guys can, watch it again at your leisure. Does it, anybody else have any questions?
I see that Debbie posted a question about money management.
Yes,
I'm wondering if some of the things you were just talking about, Caroline, also plays into that.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is another great place to start with some questions and figure out what's not working about the situation. So, if I was working with a student who was struggling with this, I would say, um, okay, so what is not working for you right now about the way you're spending your money? And based on this question, I would assume the student would say something like, well, then I don't have enough money left to buy the food that I want to on the weekends because I've spent it all during the week. Um, and then I would ask, okay, what is causing you to, you know, buy too much other stuff during the week? Um, and just really see what comes out of the conversation that they can share with me. And then I would ask them, what is something you want to experiment with to see what might help you control your spending? I like using the word experiment because it puts less pressure on it. It's less like you have to come up with a plan that definitely works in the next week to what can we just play around with to see if it works. And then I would have a check in point with them like, okay, here's the plan that you said you over the next week. We're going to check in about how it went next week. And if it worked, great. We're going to celebrate that. If it didn't, what happens with a lot of students without that accountability is then they'll just give up and say, like, well, it didn't work. Like, I shouldn't have tried. Going back to that cycle of success.